Hello, it's 4 minutes after 10, and it is one of those mornings where you wonder whether you might be inhabiting some sort of parallel reality, some sort of alternative universe. You might have wandered onto the holodeck on Red Dwarf and woken up surrounded by holograms and false representations of reality. Which headline would you actually start with? Would you start with Bernie Ecclestone, the Formula One Supremo, coming out as the president of the Vladimir Putin fan club? And having a swing at Volodymyr Zelensky while also telling Lewis Hamilton to get over the latest episode of him receiving racist abuse, in this case from the former Formula One driver Nelson Piquet. So Vladimir Putin, Bernie Ecclestone says he would take a bullet for Vladimir Putin. Is that the headline you would start with today? Or do you prefer this one? Prince Charles has promised not to accept any more suitcases full of cash from sort of dodgy Middle Eastern potentates. I mean, for the record, I'm not making that promise on this occasion. I try and keep it on the down low, but equally, I mean, this is the front page of a national newspaper in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. Charles would never take suitcase of cash again. Prince Charles would never again take large bundles of cash from benefactors after the furore over a £2.58 million donation from an Arab ruler. And it is a country with a questionable human rights record. 3 donations each of €1 million. Euros? Farage will be having a fit. What's wrong with good old-fashioned British? If you're going to take a suitcase full of cash from a potentate, from an Arab potentate, the least you could do is take it in pounds sterling with the Queen's face on it. Blimmin' euros? What sort of a traitor is? That's not even the best story that I suspect, just because the weight now of reality is becoming almost too much for anybody to bear. It's barely being reported at all that the governor of the Bank of England, it used to be the case that if the governor of the Bank of England sneezed, the whole of the British media caught a cold. Every utterance, every syllable would be afforded enormous weight. But since Mark Carney came out essentially against Brexit and subsequently got proved completely right, while people like Jacob Rees-Mogg claimed that you shouldn't listen to the governor of the Bank of England on matters fiscal, you should listen instead to him, the sort of cosplaying Victorian undertaker. The role of the governor in British public discourse, or at least in media reportage, has been hugely diminished. Reality keeps proving the last fella right, so we better ignore the current fella. Guess what the governor of the Bank of England has said? Households and businesses face a very large national real income shock that will make Britain the worst performing country in the developed world. Trebles all round. Of course, nothing to do with the Prime Minister or indeed the Conservative government. They continue to get all the big calls right while simultaneously doing their best. Andrew Bailey said the UK economy is weakening more than others. It has been evident in the last few months, and in the last months it has happened. This was at the annual forum of the European Central Bank. But hey-ho, look over there, there's a little rabbit. Unbelievable. Thank goodness we haven't recently become the only country in history to impose economic sanctions on ourselves. Otherwise, we'd really be in shtuck. We'd somehow be worse, potentially, than the worst performing economy in the developed world. But we're not going to talk about the head of the Formula One operations, suggesting that he would take a bullet for Vladimir Putin. We're not going to talk about Prince Charles's noble and admirable promise not to accept any more suitcases of cash from Arab potentates. And we're not going to talk about the governor of the Bank of England warning that the United Kingdom is set to become the worst performing economy in the developed world. We're going to talk instead about a story that is it's fascinating on a million levels. It's fascinating politically, it's fascinating socially, and it's fascinating, I think, journalistically as well. You remember last week when the Times newspaper reported briefly that Downing Street staff, possibly up to and including Boris Johnson, had sought to get a job for his then mistress in the Foreign Office. His then mistress, now wife. The affair, it turns out, had been going on for rather a long time. It started before Boris Johnson's previous wife was diagnosed with cancer and continued throughout her chemotherapy treatment. But you remember that the story appeared in the Times and then disappeared, becoming almost immediately a sterling example of something called a Streisand effect, which I'd like to thank everybody involved in pulling that story from the Times for giving me a crash course in what the Streisand effect actually was. I had spent years thinking that the Streisand effect was when you announce your farewell tour and sell out the Albert Hall for 2 weeks, and then a couple of years later you come back for another farewell tour. I don't know where I got the wrong end of the stick on that one, but I've misused the phrase Streisand effect many times over the years. Turns out instead it's when you try and remove something from the public eye. In Barbara Streisand's case, it was a beach house, I think, in Florida, a photograph of a beach house that she tried to sort of get struck from the public record for perfectly understandable protection of privacy reasons. But in trying to do so, she accidentally drew way, way, way more attention to the story than just allowing it to pass unnoticed or unmentioned would have done in the first place. The Streisand effect kicked in on this story about Downing Street trying to get Carrie Symonds, as she then was, a big 6-figure job in the Foreign Office in a spectacular fashion. And yesterday, with the publication of Private Eye, which I have recommended to you on countless occasions as by far the loudest speaker of truth to power in this country, and unlike some of us who pride ourselves on speaking truth to power, Private Eye does so without any fear or favour. Sometimes frustratingly, there is no loyalty to anything except the truth at Private Eye Towers, and while the rest of us aspire to similar levels of integrity, it is very hard, of course, to achieve. But Private Eye is a fortnightly digest of stories that a responsible media in this country would be all over on a regular basis. Way ahead of the field, for example, on the PPE scandal, way ahead of the field on the parties at Downing Street, all sorts of stuff that client journalists and client media, by which I loosely mean the stuff that is dictated by Rupert Murdoch or Viscount Rothermere over at the Daily Mail or the Barclay family at the Telegraph. They will never, ever go near it. And Private Eye have gone into much more detail about what actually happened and why there was such desperation in Downing Street to keep the details of that attempt, of that whole story, out of the newspapers. And it's pretty gross. Or not gross, that's a bit prurient of me. It's tacky and seedy and unpleasant. And Boris Johnson inevitably is sitting on a sofa smack in the middle of it. I'll share some details shortly with you that you may, if you've got very young children with you in the car, I'll choose my words very carefully and felicitously, but you may, it will involve, I won't go any further than describing what the grown-ups used to call a sex act, okay? That's all. And the question I'm going to ask you is whether it matters, and also something I only allow myself to do very rarely on the programme, because otherwise it makes for very, very lazy radio. And although I'm hugely in favour of very, very lazy radio from the presenter's perspective, I appreciate that from the listener's perspective it can be less attractive. I'm going to ask whether you care. And if not, why not? Because I'm pretty sure I do. But I do suffer from my Catholic upbringing, Catholic with a capital C. And by suffer, I mean I sometimes have a slightly sententious or overly judgmental moral compass. And I do subscribe still to the belief that what goes on in private life can be a reliable indicator of what might happen in public life. And that if a man, for example, can lie to his wife, then he will be quite comfortable lying to a select committee or a parliament or an entire country. I don't know whether that is a valid view anymore. It's valid, but I don't know whether it is an important view anymore. I really don't. So the reason why they were so desperate to keep this story out of the Times, and of course it is for the man who was editing that night, Tony Gallagher, and the woman in charge of the entire operation, Rebecca Brooks, to explain why they acceded to Downing Street's requests in such a shameless and anti-journalistic fashion. If you ever get the chance to ask them, please do, because I certainly never will. The reason why they were so keen to keep this story out of the newspapers is that there was grave concern, according to Private Eye, who have some of the hardest working lawyers in the whole of the British media, so I just get that out there front and centre early doors, was because of the details that weren't published by the Times. So this is like the Streisand effect squared. John Ashcroft, who accepted a peerage from David Cameron after making various promises about his offshore finances, published a book a couple of years ago which originally broke this story it described how aides at the Foreign Office were wary of Boris Johnson's desire to give Carrie Symonds a job because they had become aware of the fact that he was having an extramarital affair with her. He was having an adulterous affair with her. And the way in which they became aware was because an MP who was used to dropping into Johnson's parliamentary office without warning walked in abruptly and found Johnson and his current wife, then mistress, in what has been described as a compromising situation. The Friday night attack of the Abdabs at number 10 was caused by a baseless fear that the Times might be more specific about the compromising situation, Private Eye reports. So it wasn't so much the fact that Johnson was trying to secure a six-figure job for his mistress. It was about the way in which Foreign Office aides and other colleagues had found out that the woman was his mistress. And that is the bit where listeners of a timid disposition, which is the phrase the editor of Private Eye uses in yesterday's edition, might just want to turn the volume down briefly. I don't think this qualifies as a complete trigger warning, but certainly if you have younger children in the car with you at the moment or over the brunch table, just be aware. An MP walked into the House of Commons and found the Foreign Secretary's mistress performing a sex act on the Foreign Secretary in the House of Commons estate, or in the Foreign Office. No, it would be his parliamentary office in 2018. And that was the reason why, although none of it was reported at the time, people knew she was his mistress. Otherwise, presumably, he'd have been able to get her a six-figure job as Director of Communications. I'm going to say that once more, and we're not going to dwell on this, and we're not going to be prurient or puerile, because this is, I think, the country deserves better than to be sniggering about this stuff, but it also deserves a lot better than to be silent about it. The reason why Foreign Office aides and other colleagues of the then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson knew that the woman he was trying to secure a six-figure job for as a Director of Communications in one of the great offices of state in this country is because they were disturbed in the middle of a sex act on a sofa in his parliamentary office by another MP. I'll stick in a reportedly and an allegedly, but the detail in Private Eye is eye-wateringly frank. And as I say, John Ashcroft, who sort of bought his way to prominence in journalism and polling and publishing and various other areas, had also published a more watered-down version of events. So there it is. 10:16 is the time. I'm going to get on my high horse now and tell you I think this is gross. I think it's disgusting. I can just about make allowances for the extramarital affair because that is something that happens. Marriages fail. It's sometimes two people's fault. It's very, very rarely 100% one person's fault. Just because Johnson has a history of sexual incontinence and fathering children all over the shop, some of which he publicly acknowledges, some of which he moves heaven and earth to avoid publicly acknowledging, doesn't mean I don't know the privacy. I don't know the details of his last marriage's failure any more than I know the details of what on earth would have attracted Carrie Symonds to a man widely tipped to become Prime Minister in the first place. But I do know this. It's the House of Commons. It used to be front page news if they found smears of cocaine on the cistern of House of Commons lavatories. It probably still is. But the man who is now Prime Minister, sitting on a sofa, enjoying a sex act from a woman who was not his wife, what's happened? What's happened in his parliamentary office? What's happened? Tell me a politician who could have been reported to have engaged in this sort of behaviour, whose career wouldn't be over in a nanosecond. Tell me, if you would, a Labour politician who wouldn't be all over the front pages today if this had been about them, even if opposition. In opposition, imagine it was Keir Starmer or Jeremy Corbyn. Sorry, no one wanted that mental image. Just imagine. Right? I'm not going nuts, am I? This is really, really weird. And what is misconduct in public office? If not a sex act on a sofa in your parliamentary premises. But I don't know, and this is where perhaps I need your help. Is it just because it's him? Is this the most positive proof yet that the rules, the normal standards just don't apply? Look, you can cheat on your wife and remain in politics. Didn't used to be the case. Cecil Parkinson's career was over when he impregnated his secretary, to all intents and purposes. It's only, 40 years ago, if that? And here we are now. Oh, yeah, okay, what else is in the news today? He's signed a big cheque for Ukraine. Let's talk about that. So, have we gone mad? Or is this just the case of me being a bit of a dinosaur and this sort of stuff doesn't matter anymore? And this is the key bit, because I'm not going to buy the argument that this sort of stuff doesn't matter anymore unless it wouldn't matter whoever it was in the centre of this story. So here I am asking you a question that even in these crazy times, I never thought I'd ask. Does it matter that a foreign secretary in his parliamentary office was interrupted in the middle of a sex act being performed by his then mistress, now wife? 03456060973. 973. Two more words for you. Monica Lewinsky. That was quite a big deal, wasn't it, at the time? It's not identical. But then the second question I've got for you is, how do you think we've reached a place in our history where this isn't a bigger deal? How has that happened? Is it all down to who it is? Or is there something more significant and arguably even more sinister going on? You've got an MP who resigned recently for looking at pornography that he stumbled across while searching for pictures of tractors. He's not in the House of Commons anymore. And yet, the man who accepted his resignation was interrupted in flagrante delicto in his actual office. I'm not going mad, am I? This is a really strange day. And once again, we get through it by keeping our eyes open, our consciences clear, and each other company. Let me just drive home a couple more points. Okay, the Mail, for example, tries to impute some sort of sexual misbehaviour upon Angela Rayner for crossing her legs in the House of Commons. Crossing her legs in the House of Commons. The Mail on Sunday turns it into a story about her sexual charms. Crossing her legs in the House of Commons, right? Watching sex in the office on a mobile phone is a career-ending offence, as the former MP for Honiton and Tiverton recently discovered. Having sex in the office, not so much. The number of people that kept this quiet, I find it staggering. But of course, my entirely evidence-based views about Boris Johnson are pretty clear, pretty well established if you listen to this programme. Diane Abbot got into trouble for drinking a Marks and Spencer's mojito on a train. Boris Johnson is interrupted by a colleague in the middle of a sex act in his parliamentary office, being performed by his mistress while he was married to somebody else. And here we are, just waving it through, right? So the question of whether you care and whether it matters is secondary, actually. I want you to tell me what's happened, because I'm under no illusions at all that in almost every previous chapter of my life, this story would be immense. And with almost any other politician you can think of, this story would be absolutely huge. Private Eye published it yesterday. As far as I can tell, not a single newspaper has gone near it today. 25 minutes after 10 is the time. Sorry, I should have punted out the number a bit more. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What's happened is the question that I'm asking you. I'm not under any illusions about whether or not this would be a huge story in other circumstances or in previous times. I want you to tell me why you think it isn't. And I'll use those two examples of two Labour female politicians. Angela Rayner makes national news when the Mail on Sunday want to impute some sort of sexual subtext to her leg crossing, the crossing of her legs in the House of Commons. Diane Abbot makes national news when someone takes a photograph of her drinking a canned mojito on a train where you're not supposed to consume alcohol. Boris Johnson, and they all know, the donors know, they write a book about it. Colleagues know that they're sufficiently aware of it to block the promotion of the mistress to a six-figure job in the Foreign Office. But the plebs, you, me, if it wasn't for Private Eye, we never would have known about it at all. And they even get on the phone to Rupert Murdoch's lackeys because they think the story's about to come out and say, could you please pull the entire story from the Times newspaper, please? And what do they say? They say yes. Yes, we will pull the story from the Times. And the Mail website as well. So let's look at the Mail. Angela Rayner crossing her legs is a story of sexual significance. Boris Johnson being caught in the act, in his office, in the House of Commons, with his mistress, is not. Just tell me why. 0345 6060 973. Ken's in Leeds. Ken, sorry to keep you, mate. I had quite a lot to get off my chest, it turns out. What would you like to say?
That's all right, James, and it was all very meaningful and to the point.
I hope so.
My point of view is this. First of all, you need somebody like Johnson who gives no account whatsoever to any rules or restrictions. That's one of the essential ingredients of this. You next need a client press and media. And the honourable exceptions to this are your programme and Sheila Fogarty's programme and Channel 4 News.
And Private Eye as well, and we've got other colleagues who perhaps you don't listen to who would never deserve to be filed under client journalist. But I
have my copy beside me.
There you go.
But the thing is, I believe that the press and to some extent television stations are beholden to their masters. And their masters have a vested interest in keeping Johnson and the Conservative Party where they are. And you also need a craven parliament in government. And I think all these things come together in a perfect storm. But I think the main plank of all this is the media.
So it's all about him. It's not about a change in the morality of the nation. I mean, the tabloids can be incredibly hypocritical when it comes to prurience and disapproval. If you saw the social life CV of the average tabloid journalist, your dentures would fall out. But then when a footballer is caught with his pants down, they come over all, Archbishop of Canterbury, don't they? So I get that. But why with him is it all given a free pass? What do they get out of keeping him in power? I don't quite see the next dot in the chain.
Well, he's somebody that they can control, isn't he? To some extent. Because of how he is, he's somebody that they can... He will do their bidding eventually. And I think that's why they want to keep him where he is. Because, he's their client guy. It's like, you keep going back to the 30s, but in Germany... The establishment thought that they could control Hitler. Once they got him into power, we can control this guy, we can make him do what we want. And I think it's the same with Johnson.
I don't know that I agree with you, but all contributions are welcome. There's obviously something in it for them, you'd imagine. Otherwise, they would have moved to replace him in some way. But you're doing the big picture, Ken, for which I thank you. I'm focusing in, unpleasant though it is, on the little picture today, the picture of Boris Johnson sitting on his sofa. And it doesn't matter apparently in Brexit Britain. I'd like you to tell me why not. And you can't tell me that it just doesn't matter, because it would have mattered at any point previously with any other politician, and I bet it will again. Angela Rayner crosses her legs in the House of Commons, and the Mail on Sunday turn it into a story about her sexual allure. It's 10:30. Dominic Ellis is here now with the headlines. It is 10:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I am wondering what has happened. What has happened to our country, possibly to our media, and certainly to our politics, when apparently loads of people can know that Boris Johnson is caught on a sofa in his office in Parliament, enjoying a sex act being performed by his mistress, who's now his wife. The story can get pulled from the Times newspaper because the involved parties were worried that detail was going to be included in the report. It wasn't, which makes it almost hilariously ridiculous, the intervention. They can get the story pulled, and newspapers that write about Angela Rayner crossing her legs, as if that makes her a Jezebel, a temptress. Diane Abbott having a tin of mojito on a train where you're not supposed to drink alcohol. I mean, Matt Hancock resigned for being caught kissing his mistress in his... I'm just asking what has happened. The short answer, one of the shorter answers, is that there was no footage of this. It just got caught by a colleague, and they've kept it all on the down low, kept it all quiet. Enough people knew for the kibosh to be put upon his attempt to get his mistress a figure job in the department. Enough people knew about it for that, but no one thought we needed to know, as he moved from Foreign Office to Downing Street, where, of course, he didn't demand that Matt Hancock resigned after being caught merely kissing, standing up kissing his mistress in his office. I think now we all know why, don't we? It's one mystery solved. It's not even 12 o'clock yet. Julian's in Marlow. Julian, what would you like to say?
You asked if it's acceptable or not, and
does it?
Clearly it is.
Yeah, I did.
Clearly it is.
Yeah.
The reasons why it's acceptable is because the grounds for what is acceptable and what is not have moved due to populism, other.
Was it ever objective? Because, I mean, you say it doesn't matter, and I understand your reasoning, but apparently it does matter. The way in which Angela Rayner crosses her legs does matter. So
it's the red meat theory that you had before, that the people who brought Boris into power
yes.
don't measure Boris by anything other than the fact that he's meeting these key criteria, regardless of anything else, regardless of welfare, regardless of propriety. Right. It doesn't matter. He's just got this one thing that he's managed to do.
Brexit.
And so therefore they will...
Which he hasn't managed to do, but we're talking about the rhetoric, not the reality.
It's the rhetoric, because yes. To the point that you made about being caught on camera,
yes.
they can't avoid that. And I think there is I was going to sound terrible, but a sort of dumbing down of the British population's
yes.
Or the British population's requirements for proof. They unless they see it and it's visceral or it's affecting them directly, and even then it has to.
I
affect
think
them
you're optimistic.
Really.
I think even if footage had emerged of this, he'd probably claim it was a work event.
That's the get out of jail card of all get out of jail cards nowadays.
You know, I'm only 52% joking, Julian. I wish I was.
48% of me doesn't find it funny.
No, same.
Doesn't find it funny.
But it is. It's whatever the opposite of a level playing field is. I know, obviously, it's an unlevel playing field, but it is just one rule for him, and this is probably the biggest proof yet of that simple fact.
It's in the past when people had done anything approaching this sort of thing. Not to say, and I don't care about people's personal lives in office. I don't. I mean, I know you have your point of view.
I do a little. I think the line, and it's a bit glib, but if you can lie to your wife, you can lie to anyone. I did
absolutely, but I don't mind that so much as the abuse of that power afterwards. So, for example. People can. There is a separation of church and state, for example, or there should be a separation of church and state. There is a separation between what you have to do in your professional career and what you must do for the good of the population, and then your personal life. So there are many figures in history who did good overall, but weren't exactly saints. Absolutely.
That's a really good point. Actually, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as it were.
For example, exactly. So. I don't. If he did his job well, I wouldn't mind what his personal life was about. However, he's not doing his job well. He is also using the power given to him by his role today and previously, and abusing that power. So mistresses given given favours, given money, essentially.
It? Yeah.
And
which would be the second time that had happened, of course, while he was in public office. That we know of.
Yeah, James, that we know of.
Yes.
That we know of. We don't even have to say allegedly.
No.
We can just say that we know of, which is giving a wider berth in a different direction.
Yes.
That we know of is the second time. But this doesn't matter. It is, however, Angela Rayner's, not Claire Rayner, that was an agony aunt, I believe. Angela Rayner, no disrespect to both, they're very, very competent professionals. Angela Rayner's crossing of the legs, that's just red meat to the masses, because she is not delivering on this one criteria.
It is that simple. I think you're right.
That's what it is. So no.
So as long as that balloon remains inflated, even though yesterday on German television, again something that won't be picked up by British media, Boris Johnson was praying for the day when everyone has forgotten about Brexit and stopped talking about it. You can see why. But as long as the balloon of nonsense, the balloon of bilge remains inflated, people will allow, forgive, pass off everything. I mean, the only resistance I have to Julian's analysis is that it is so simple and straightforward. And, you know, I have 3 hours a day to contemplate these matters. I like to think it's more complicated and lends itself to deeper thinking. But sometimes you need to do the deeper thinking to get to the relatively straightforward conclusion. Thank you, Julian. And I particularly enjoyed your concern at the reputations of Claire Rayner, the late agony aunt and mother, of course, of the Observer's restaurant critic. A rather brilliant Jay Rayner. Thank you, Julian. I mean, yeah. The problem now is, do you recognise yourself? Are you, so these are the people that fascinate me, are you someone that sits there tutting into your marmalade over Angela Rayner crossing her legs and the disgusting misogynistic way in which Glenn Owen reported it and David Dillon published it in the Mail on Sunday, while also going, oh, well, it's absolutely acceptable for the Foreign Office to have to be careful with my language here. I mean, you all know what happened, but you don't need me to paint any pictures or drop any sort of double entendre style hints. Absolutely outraged, or at least piqued. My disapproval was piqued by that horrible story about Angela Rayner crossing her legs. But the Foreign Secretary enjoying a sex act on a sofa in his parliamentary office and being interrupted by a colleague, the discovery of the affair leading to the kibosh being put upon his attempt to install her in a £100,000 a year job as Director of Communications, that's just outrageous. It's objectively outrageous. I'd love to talk to you if you are now being described. That Angela Rayner, oh, she's trouble. Oof, honestly, have you seen the length of her skirt? And when she crosses her legs, oh dear, that's awful. Boris Johnson enjoying a sex act on a sofa in the House of Commons with a woman who has subsequently become his wife, but at the time was his mistress, and who he would have installed in a six-figure job in the Foreign Office if he hadn't actually been caught in the middle of the sex act by a colleague. Oh, that's absolutely fine. How have they done that to you? Is it just Brexit? Are you still clinging to the carcass of Brexit, even as the Governor of the Bank of England warns that we're about to become the worst performing economy in the developed world? You still think it's a big enough win to forgive him everything else, even as he appears on German television laughing at you by dreaming of the day when we all stop talking about Brexit. Since when did any winner want you to stop talking about a victory? Could you imagine if Alex Ferguson said, I wish you'd stop talking about all those titles I won? Could you imagine that? Or if Andy Murray said, oh, please don't mention the Wimbledons I won? Be ridiculous. Bad luck last night, Andy, by the way, if you're listening. I just take a moment to say you are an absolute... It's rather presumptuous of me to imagine that he's listening, but you never know. If you see him today, just tell him he's a star, will you? He's brought me more pleasure than any British sportsman in my lifetime, including Trevor Francis. 10:42 is the time. Susan is in Crawley. Susan, what's going on?
Do you know what, James? As I said to your researcher, the morality of the man, it's not in question. We know he's deeply immoral. We know he's selfish. We know he'll cling to power at any cost. My concern in this story, for the whole affair that he conducted, his wife had cancer. She was going through chemo.
Later she did.
Survivor.
I'm not interrupting. Well, I am interrupting you, but only briefly to say that at the time of this particular sex act, her cancer hadn't been diagnosed, although the affair did continue after it had been diagnosed and while she was receiving chemotherapy. So just a detail, perhaps. But
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm more concerned about the fact that he had the affair at all whilst his wife was going through this. I'm a cancer survivor. The last thing I felt whilst I was going through that was sexy. The last thing I felt was being able to perform any kind of wifely duty.
Oh.
I don't know if that stands for every woman that has gone through this.
Right.
I felt my partner, who is my wife now, didn't make me feel that way at all. That's how I felt. Oh. So for me, his affair was an act of cruelty. Even if it started before, it should have stopped. Even for the duration of his wife's illness, he could have picked it up again. Do you understand me, James?
I understand.
I wanted to
no,
make.
you've just moved me. That's why I'm quiet. You've moved me.
It's a new level to the man. He's cruel. He's insensitive, and for that reason, I would never ever vote for him at all. And I long for his demise.
political demise, just to be absolutely clear. Susan, you make a really powerful point, and I mean it, a very moving point. I've not been there. I've neither had cancer nor had an affair, and thankfully my wife hasn't been ill in that way either. But I can't quite imagine it. What would you do? What would you do? And what did he do? He did what he always did. Let's go back to the school report, shall we? It serves us so well. I think he honestly believes that it is childish of us not to regard him as an exception, one who should be free of the network of obligation which binds everyone else. I'll take a moment here, if I may, just to reflect upon, because I've done a few public events lately, and I know a lot of people very kindly come up and thank me for sort of keeping the light on and even keeping them sane. I always say that's mutual. That works both ways. You've kept me sane. I feel a sense of relief in the last month or so, perhaps since the vote of no confidence. I feel a sense of relief because the emperor really is naked. And there's always that. And today's story is probably the final nail in the coffin of the suspicion that you might be the one that was missing something. You might be the one that was mad and everybody else was sane. The man's despicable. There is no getting away from it. I don't have the words, and my vocabulary is pretty good. It's pretty big. I don't have the words to describe what Susan just encapsulated. The moral bankruptcy, the sexual incontinence necessary to do what Boris Johnson does, has always done and will always do. So I have felt in the last month, I've only just noticed it then, actually, a sense of relief. As if, well, it doesn't matter how bad things get, we were right. He really was that awful. You know, sometimes people might say to me, do you think you should tone it down a little bit? Do you think, and I think, yeah, maybe I should actually, this can't be helpful, you know, it's a democracy, he's in charge, but no, he's every bit as awful, just like Trump is being discovered to be at the January the 6th hearings, as we touched on yesterday with Simon Marks. He wanted to go there. He didn't care that they were armed because they weren't going to hurt him. I mean, the depravity of Donald Trump was right there, front and centre, but so many people in the British media and British politics were behaving as if he's not that bad. Don't be silly, don't mention the 1930s, don't use the F word. And now here we are looking at Boris Johnson. Oddly, this story, the more we talk about it, the more I think about it, the more it sits, the more I have that sense of, oh, thank goodness for that. Or I mean, not even thank goodness. I'd quite like to have been the one that was mad and wrong about this. I'm now 100% certain that I'm not. The man's morality, the man is monstrous, morally monstrous. And the bit I'll never get, if I live to be 112, is you. You who would be like me if it was anybody else. You who does have a moral compass. You who do care about family values. You do think that a man who can lie to his wife can lie to anyone. And at any other point in history with any other politician, you'd have been joining me on the slightly moralistic or judgmental side of the fence. And I believe you would have meant it. I'm not going to suggest that your whole moral compass has been fraudulent for your entire life. I think you would have meant it. I don't think you cared particularly about Angela Rayner crossing her legs, but if any other politician, Labour, Liberal Democrat, Paddy Ashdown, Labour, John Prescott, Conservative, Cecil Parkinson, if any other politician had been reported to have behaved in this fashion, and as Julian Imalo beautifully reminded us, not just the sexual indiscretion, which some people can find forgivable, some people can find negligible, but trying to put your mistress into a big job. That doesn't get much more corrupt than that, does it? Really? Morally? And you would have hated that once. You would have hated that once. You would have thought, as I do, that it brings the entire country into disrepute. But here you are, still waving your flag and supporting him. Why? Why? That's not a rhetorical question. I'd love you to call me and tell me. Why? 0345 6060973. And if the penny's dropping, if you're listening to this, as many people do, and going, oh, God, he's right. I've been shouting at him for years. Dave got in touch early doors to say, I hate you. And I've tuned in by accident this morning, but you're absolutely spot on this. If you're listening now and thinking, oh, God, he's right. He really is as awful as James has been telling us all this time. Then just give me a ring and tell me why you resisted that conclusion when the evidence was so clear. I just would genuinely love to know, because I like to take things apart in the hope of understanding how they work, and then together we can put it back together again. It's stunning, right? This is Britain. This is the United Kingdom. This is England. And we are ruled by a man who makes Henry VIII look like Mary Whitehouse. 10:52 is the time. I mean, you'd be fired if it was your workplace and you were caught in a... Well, I say you would. Apparently there were scenes at the Sun newspaper, of course, when they had an illegal lockdown party that were pretty Roman, for want of a better adjective. I don't know. I mean, it's a strange old time. But there has to be a difference between people in public office, elected representatives, people in charge, in this case of the Foreign Office, now of the country, and the rest of us. And Boris Johnson's behaviour, unchallenged, undenied, unremarkable in many ways, has diminished our entire country. And people who love our country still defend him. That's what fascinates me most. Or if not most, then a lot. I'll tell you what, a few of you are pointing out that someone's just hired Gavin Williamson on 50 grand a year, about 630 odd quid an hour, to advise an education company. I said it before and I'll say it again. It's the satirists I feel sorry for. Although this week, in particular, Private Eye seem to be doing okay in the circumstances. Pete's in Preston. Pete, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. So, I mean, I feel like I'm echoing a lot of the sentiment of people I've already called in, and I don't want to trivialise things, but I've got a bit of an analogy which makes sense in my little brain anyway. But in terms of his character, I feel he's very much like Voldemort in that he's very interested in power only. He'll do what he wants. When we all said it was priced in, all these stories, they are like the Horcrux for other people.
I didn't see this one coming on the horizon, Pete. Go on.
Yeah, maybe it's the COVID talking, I don't know. But I say for everyone else, we all knew what he was like. And that would normally, I say when a controversial thing comes out, it would normally...
But that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You see, I wonder if we do all... I mean, look, I say he's gross. I think it's horrible. Someone else says he's gross, I love it. And you say, but why do you love it? And all they usually have is because it upsets people like you. So I get those two strands, if you like. I think he's gross, he's diminishing our country. That's awful. Yeah, I think he's gross, he's diminishing our country. That's great because it upsets people like you. They're the patriots, remember, under the Liz Truss definition of patriot. But then you must have another group of people who... I say he's gross, that's disgusting, it's diminishing our country. And they say, no, he isn't. There must be people who think the emperor's still got clothes on. And they're the people that I'm so interested in because they do have moral, they may even have Christian values or religious values that he just...
But I think they want to be part of,
Part of what?
Part of that club, like the useful people that helped Voldemort return, if you want to extend an analogy, that you think everyone else is muggles. And as long as you're useful, fantastic.
You're not letting go of this. You're not letting go of the Voldemort analogy, are you? I love that. He's brought the muggles into it now. We're going to...
But it's very cash-in-hand politics. It really is. It's just like, I'll do what I need to do to, like you said, you probably tell I can listen to it a bit, but it's very much just to survive the next day. Cash in hand, boom, done. Cash in hand. And it's very, transactional, and he doesn't care that it really harms things because it's not harming him. He's getting his way. And that's the price that was. Well, that's what. Yeah,
I think an earlier. Yeah, I like it. I don't think you have echoed. No, well, a lot of people think that the slow and steady will eventually kick in, and people will turn to Keir Starmer with a sense of relief almost and relaxation. It's certainly what he. Well, I suggested to him not long ago he needed to be a bit more of a showman, and he was absolutely adamant that he doesn't. He said, you've seen what happens when we elect a showman. So I said, all right, then what about a salesman? And he conceded that he probably does need to be a little bit more of a salesman. The problem at the moment is that we don't know what product he is selling apart from himself. Earlier caller, he didn't echo anyone, Pete. Certainly first time Harry Potter's been brought into proceedings, so it's a lovely call. But an earlier caller mentioned... the separation of church and state. I think it was Julian. I just want to warn you about something now, because this, again, call me Cassandra, this will happen if it isn't happening already. They've already attacked the church over the Rwanda criticism. David Yelland, a former editor of The Sun, posted yesterday that the revelation about Prince Charles accepting suitcases full of cash was probably a revenge operation by Downing Street after Prince Charles criticised them over Rwanda. So the Church of England gets attacked by this lot as they have to mobilise everything to defend the indefensible Boris Johnson. The royal family, if David Yelland, a former editor of The Sun, is correct, and he believes that the revelations were quite widely known, the question is why Downing Street would have chosen now to leak them to the press. If that's happened, as I say, it was something that a former editor of The Sun tweeted. But they wouldn't really hesitate to have a swing at the royal family. They sent Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the Queen about the proroguing of Parliament, so that bit's not controversial. So the Church of England, the royal family, all off limits. You remember Paul Dacre, who he's going to put in the House of Lords, attacked judges, the judiciary, enemies of the people. Johnson goes along with that because they talk now about lefty lawyers. They're attacking lawyers. They're attacking the law. So we've got the Church. We've got the royal family, we've got lawyers, judges, the law, they're all under attack. Because I'm a bit weird, I always wonder what's going to be next. Academics are under attack already. You see that not just in the suspension of English literature being taught at places like Sheffield Hallam University, but also there was a minister not long ago under Theresa May who was demanding that all academics who espoused the reasons why leaving the European Union was stupid should be put on a list. But that was Theresa May, so we won't put that there. Not that example, but we can put academics on the list. So we've got, I'm going to lose track of this. Is anyone writing it down? The Church of England, the royal family, judges, lawyers, the law, academia. Well, actually, you can have academia twice because Paul Dacre, who Boris Johnson is going to put in the House of Lords, he went with the Remainer University's front page. So what's going to happen next? Well, academia is going to come around again, but select committees. I've been thinking this for a while. I'm interviewing Chris Bryant later today for Full Disclosure, and some of the work he's done at Select Committee is fascinating. Tom Tugendhat today on the Russia corruption problem. Select committees. Front page of today's Daily Telegraph. Number 10 fears PM faces kangaroo court. Well, that sounds bad. What's the kangaroo court that the Prime Minister faces? It's the inquiry into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate risks, and it's been conducted by the Privileges Committee, on which 4 out of 7 of the members are Conservative MPs. So even now, the next line of attack is against a committee with a Conservative majority. We missed a couple, didn't we? When you are defending the indefensible, what will you attack? Who will you attack? So we start with the Church of England, and then we move on to the royal family, and then we've got judges, and then we've got lawyers, and then we've got the actual law, of course. And then we've got select committees, even the ones with a Conservative majority. Allies of the Prime Minister last night accused the inquiry launched by the House of Commons Privileges Committee of being a kangaroo court. That is a committee upon which there is currently a majority of Conservative MPs. I forgot about the BBC. I forgot about Channel 4. When you are defending the indefensible, what wouldn't you attack? Academia? It's already often under attack. That's what the whole woke nonsense and culture war is supposed to be about. I could just do with one more to go for the 10. You know what it's going to be? Little old me. Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, publicly revealing that she had called for me to lose my job for telling the truth about her. That's it. 10 things. 10 things that you end up attacking when you're trying to defend the indefensible. The royal family, the Church of England, judges, lawyers, the law, academia, the BBC, Channel 4. Going to forget one now. What was the other one? Something else? And me. So it's 11:04. Glenn's in Hoddesdon. Glenn, what made you pick up the phone?
Literally, James, it was just that you asked that simple question. Why do you think that normal people, or reasonably moral people, normal average people, aren't clamouring for like Boris and especially Trump and people like that to be thrown out?
Yeah.
And it's something that I thought about myself, and I thought about it because over COVID, we had a really, really bad time. I think I had a badder time as, let's just say, most people would have had. So at the end of the day, when Boris was having parties, I was questioning myself as why I wasn't actually out with a placard with maybe people with the opposite, political spectrum protesting.
So you're a fan, traditionally, a big fan, are you, of him?
No, not really at all. Not. I wouldn't say a big fan. It was just. I would vote Conservative normally, but it just surprised me that when all these things come out and you can't argue them right or wrong, why I would still be saying no. Let's keep Boris. That did question me.
And you are in that. You're still in that camp, are you? You're still in the.
I really am, unfortunately, James. Yeah.
Well, don't say unfortunately. Why? What would? I mean, he was having parties. What happened during COVID? What was the worst thing that happened to you during COVID?
Well, I lost my mum during COVID, and if I'm honest with you, James, that wasn't the worst thing that happened to me. So you can imagine it wasn't a very good time for my family.
And he was having parties.
So why wouldn't?
But he's still your man.
A straight, normal person would be saying, "Look, let's get this guy out." When I thought about it really quickly, Jane, I know you've been so one way.
I want no. You take as long as you want, mate. Seriously.
The simple analogy is, if you've got a really, really decent company like KPMG, somebody like that who looks after money and they're really good, and you invest £100,000, and over a year they get you a return of 3% every year for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
But then you've got another company over the road, and they're group scientists, and they get a monkey to throw a dart at the stocks and shares, and consistently over the last 100 years they get you a return of 15%.
Right.
You go with a monkey.
Oh, I see.
I know that sounds... Do you understand what I mean, Jay?
No.
I know it sounds very,
well, no,
very
I understand the
whatever.
words that you're using, but what's the return that you think that you're getting?
Okay, so for example, if that's my perception, that's what I think is a perception of most people. So say, for example...
But I can
Brexit.
count money. Well, I mean, I was about to say, you clearly still think Brexit was a good idea, don't you?
I know, but James... I didn't phone up here to argue the benefits of Brexit with you.
You kind of did, because you cannot defend Boris Johnson unless you're still clinging to the carcass of Brexit. It's intellectually impossible.
Fine, that's perfect. You've got me, but I'm not clinging to Brexit. I'm not clinging to the rights or wrongs of it. I'm clinging to simply one fact.
Go on.
That he got it done.
But he didn't.
So now, say for example...
But he didn't. He didn't.
In the perception of... In the view of somebody that says... I want to have Brexit.
Yes.
And you have Theresa May and you have the paralysis in Parliament. And if I could just jump to Trump 1 minute, if that would be okay. So,
yes, of course, Glenn.
Believe me, I'm no Trump supporter either. I'm not that already. But what I'm saying is, if you're an American and he says, look, Americans for Americans jobs, and then Ford say, I'm moving a car plant to Mexico, and he says, do that and I'll tax you 50% or whatever it was, and they change their mind. That's people seeing things getting done.
Let's not talk about, because I don't think that happened, did it?
I actually think that did, James.
Did it?
But there were other things. Like I say, I'm no expert on politics, but when he moved it, and again,
well, but let's talk about you. Let's zone in on this.
Sure.
So you've got the governor of the Bank of England warning that our economy is going to be the worst in the developed world soon.
Sure.
You've got even the government's own forecasts describing the damage done to our GDP by Brexit as being off the scale, worse than COVID, by multiples, worse than what COVID has done. The Brexit that you still think he got done is not done. They're now threatening to tear up the treaty that you're claiming as a reason for continuing to support Boris Johnson. They're trying to pass legislation in the House of Commons that would allow them to abandon what you have been persuaded involved getting Brexit done. So they're trying, literally, Glenn, as we speak, they're trying to get Brexit undone. And here you are, still. Why?
They're trying to get just that border between Northern Ireland and England and UK changed, aren't they? That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Can I just say as well, all the forecasts as well, this is another thing
let's just focus on that. Because you use the phrase get Brexit done, that they are now trying to get Brexit undone.
Undone. But
so you can't cheer them for getting it done and cheer them when they're trying to get it undone.
But the point is, James,
go on.
The things that they've said to have, we're going to do this,
yes,
they actually have done.
For example?
They've got, as in Brexit, and that you can criticise it now.
You have to listen to the words, Glenn. You have to listen to the words.
Totally listening to the words.
They are trying to get it undone. No, the only way that you could come out of the customs union and the single market while respecting the role of the Good Friday Agreement, the only way you could do that was by having a border in the Irish Sea.
But if they take away that border...
No, you can't take it away.
Why is that? Why is that, James? You have to explain, why can't we just not have a border between what is Northern Ireland and the UK?
Because that would break the Good Friday Agreement.
But I'm not being funny, but if they want to have a border between you, this is what I mean, James. If you want to a debate to me, like for example, Brexit, or you want to take a
what do you like about Brexit?
Knowledge.
What do you like about it?
No, but it's not. Honestly, James, what I'm saying is my whole reason for calling was not to debate the fact of left and right. And I live with you for one
We're not.
reason.
You're still a fan of Boris Johnson, even though you lost your mum during COVID while he was having more parties than Peter Stringfellow.
Yes.
The reason why, the only reason you've got
I'm a fan of Brexit.
But you are. You are saying he got it done.
No, you're saying I'm a fan of Boris Johnson. Not at all. You can't be a fan of somebody that's made that many mistakes.
But here you are, supporting him, ringing me to explain your support for him.
If I think that down the road another thing's going to come up and it says, right, the country needs to do this and it needs to do that now, if he's the only person I can rely on to say, right, we're going to do it and I'll get it done, then that is what I'm trying to say to you. That is why so many people.
But that's a bit like admiring an arsonist because he has successfully set fire to a building. At least he got it done. So I'm going to insist.
Nothing like admiring, James.
I'm going to insist that you tell me what you like about Brexit. Why you're glad it got done. I just want you to give me an answer.
Back to Brexit.
Yeah.
Well, because a lot of people thought that
I don't care about them. I only care about you. I only care about you. What do you like about it?
Governing themselves.
What? No. Don't give me that. Tell me about what it is you like about it. Now, that is better. How is your life better? Why are you glad it got done? What's improved?
Well, it's not improved. I tell you what hasn't improved. That planes on.
Please just tell me what has improved.
I would say I had a granddaughter recently. That's improved for me.
Probably not a consequence of Brexit. So let's try again. What is it? Why are you glad it got? Why are you glad it got done?
James, I don't know what you want to say. My life has very little changed.
Why are you glad it got done?
Because I believe that the UK should be ruling itself. Exactly the same thing.
The UK always was ruling. The UK always was ruling itself.
Well, our courts said that was legal.
That's got nothing to do with Brexit.
It's amazingly to do with Brexit.
But that happened after Brexit got done, Glenn.
Yes, exactly. Which is why.
So how can Brexit have fixed something that you think is still broken?
Now he's going to have to change another thing where the European.
But Brexit got done, Glenn. Brexit got done.
Yeah, exactly, but that European court,
which has nothing to do with the European Union.
And now he's going to have to change that as well.
I'm going to say the words again, Glenn. That the thing you're talking about has nothing to do with membership of the European Union.
But no, it's just another thing that he's going to change. But if he needs to change that, who's going to change it?
But Glenn, I asked you why you were glad that Brexit had been done, and you talked about Rwanda. But Rwanda is happening after Brexit got done.
James, you can paint me as an extremist right wing if you want, but that's not me.
I'm not, Glenn. I'm not painting you as anything. I'm just repeating your own words back to you. The thing you've given me as a benefit of Brexit is a bad thing that happened with regard to Rwanda after Brexit happened.
I wasn't calling you about Brexit at all.
Of course you were. You can't separate Boris Johnson from Brexit. And you brought Brexit up, Glenn. When I said, why do you still like him? You said he got Brexit done.
He got it done.
So how come the Rwandan thing? How come the Rwandan thing happened then?
Well, that's exactly it. Now
it was British courts that stopped the flights to Rwanda. The massive majority of them were stopped by British courts, Glenn.
Oh, then you've got me, James. Then I was mistaken.
But you still think he's a winner, though, right? You're still glad that he got Brexit done, even though it was British courts that stopped most of those refugees being deported to Rwanda against their will.
I thought it was the European Court for Human Rights.
That was the final. And also the European Court of the European. No. That was the final cases. No, that was the final cases. Most of them had already been taken off the plane.
Overruled our courts.
But even if this was a zinger. It doesn't work because that's got nothing to do with the European Union. And do you know, finally, Glenn...
At the end of the day,
you're
not ruling yourself.
No, Glenn, you're not making any sense.
I'm not against you, and I'm not arguing with you. And I know that in a debate like this, you're far more intelligent.
It's not me. It's not intelligence, Glenn. There's just facts, mate. You can't argue about whether it's raining or not. Do you know whose idea the European Convention on Human Rights was?
No, James, but I'm sure you do.
Would you like me to tell you? Would you like me to tell you?
Yes, please. I would. I'll write it down right now.
Winston Churchill.
Fantastic.
And you're against it?
No.
Yes.
I'm against. I'm saying that we. I'm saying that we should rule our own country. Listen,
Glenn,
James,
the European Convention on Human Rights is the thing you've ended up raising as a consequence of me searching for things you thought were good about Brexit, and it's got nothing to do. Glenn, I look, they'll probably put this call up as a clip. Will you do me a favour?
Yes, James. Yes,
will you listen back to it?
I will.
And will you ask yourself this question?
Yes, I will, James.
Will you ask yourself, who did this to you?
Yeah.
All right? Who made me this person? Who put me in the position where I sounded like this on the radio? And I don't mean that unkindly, but I care about you, and I care about the country where we live. I care about the country that your granddaughter is growing up in. I care about the fact that your mother quite possibly died as a consequence of lockdowns being brought in too weakly and too late, and the leadership from Downing Street throughout the coronavirus being inadequate and unclear. I care about all of that, and I care about you. Ask yourself, when you listen back to this clip, who turned you into someone that doesn't?
But I will do, James.
Mind how you go. And listen, 18 minutes after 11 is the time. And as you'll know, if you've listened to this programme for a while, there was a time when I'd have bounced Glenn around the studio like a ping pong ball. But those days are behind us now. The battle was lost. The desire for a second referendum, which I felt could be advanced by pointing out that people who supported Brexit very, very rarely knew anything about what they were supposedly supporting. It's a pointless battle now. But I tell you something for nothing, because there'll be a lot of abuse of Glenn now on social media, and most of it will come from Brexiters who will claim that he was specially selected for being stupid, or that he was lined up as an easy target for me, or that he, is not very well or something. I don't know what the latest excuse they'll come up with is, because he held up a mirror then. Not me. Glenn just held up a mirror to every Brexiter in the country, or at least every Brexiter listening to this programme and subsequently watching the clip when it goes viral. That's why they abuse him. He held up a mirror and they saw themselves in it. From Boris Johnson down, nobody could have answered those questions any better than Glenn did. They would have sounded more intelligent. They would have sounded perhaps posher. They would have sounded perhaps better educated. But if you drilled down into the substance of what they were actually saying, it would be some gibberish about Northern Ireland, displaying complete ignorance of what the Good Friday Agreement and the single market membership involve, and then some gibberish about the European Court of Human Rights. From the editor of the Daily Mail to Downing Street to Glenn, that's all they've got. It's just that Glenn hasn't had the privilege of an education like mine or Jacob Rees-Moggs that allows him to sound articulate or intelligent when talking bilge. That's all they've got. From the editor of the Daily Mail to Boris Johnson to Dominic Raab to Jacob Rees-Mogg to Priti Patel to Nadine Dorries, right the way through, all of the columnists, all of the Murdoch knee-benders, all of the Daily Telegraph comment writers, that's all they've got. That's all. Why do you still support Boris Johnson? He got Brexit done. What does that mean? Why are they trying to get it undone? Some gibberish about Northern Ireland that displays a complete ignorance of the Good Friday Agreement and the single market. Whether it's willful ignorance or not, doesn't matter anymore. And then some gibberish about the European Convention on Human Rights. And it's not, by all means, be snobbish and rude and obnoxious about Glenn or about me. But that mirror you're looking in, that's you looking back. That's you. And my question, as ever, is, why'd you let them do this to you? The fella who, while Foreign Secretary, was having an affair with a woman, busted in his own office in the House of Commons in the middle of a sex act. And that's the only reason why he wasn't able to install her on a six-figure salary as a Director of Communications in the actual Foreign Office. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. What's going on? What's happened to our country? And fair play to Glenn for having a crack at explaining it and doing every bit as well as anybody else would. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what would you like to say?
James, good morning. Be gentle with me.
Of course. I'm gentle with everybody these days.
Really? Well, I think BJ enjoying an eponymous sex act really does matter, because personal and private lives impact on public duty. The thing that desperately concerns me is that the Prime Minister is actually being held to a lower standard of probity than those in the military and the intelligence and security service.
So Bletchley Park is not a coincidence in your call to me, or is it? I mean, are you involved in that?
No, I'm a former military intelligence officer.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
But my concern is, again, that the standard he's being held to is far lower than the standard I was held to and my colleaagues in other services, and he runs the country.
That's a really powerful point. And part of the reason for those standards is the fear of blackmail or similar.
Indeed. And affairs are a red flag on suitability because they involve deception.
Yeah.
And that, therefore, calls into question suitability for high office. And it's worth noting for all your listeners that there's a rigorous vetting process that people in the military and the intelligence and security services go through. And they question drinks habits, drugs habits, sexual habits, finances, trustworthiness. They actually ask you if you're a terrorist or whether you're a communist. And then a long process is taken with referees. And then a judgment is made on whether you're not suitable to hold a high vetting clearance, of which there are a number of levels. If any one of those is red flagged, they turn around and say, you're simply not safe to be holding on to top secret information. You're certainly not safe to get access to intelligence. And you're certainly not safe to be involved in the most sensitive issues of state, which impact on the security of the United Kingdom. And if you then look at the various flags which the vetting agencies will then look at with extreme concern, I'm afraid our Prime Minister ticks every single box. And so my question is, how has he escaped not being put under much further scrutiny or much more close scrutiny by the security services? I know it's a very highfalutin thing for me to say as a simple former army officer, but I'm desperately concerned that we've got a Prime Minister who has achieved almost nothing. And if you look at the reports that have been squashed into Lebyadev's session to the House of Lords...
I was going to mention that.
If you looked at the Russian interference report, which was suppressed, how and why is this being allowed to take place?
Wasn't there also, when he was Foreign Secretary, were there not reports that he didn't have access to absolutely everything that a Foreign Secretary might be expected to have access to because of concerns? I could have got that wrong. It just rings a vague bell, a tinkle in the background. Just talk me through why, and this might be a stupid question, but I presume it isn't because it happened. Why should the Prime Minister be held to the same standards as an army intelligence officer? Shouldn't your
the country?
Yeah, well, I know that bit, but is there no argument at all that you should be held to higher standards? Because I'm struggling now. I'm not going to lie to you, Anthony.
Well, can I spin the question back on you? Why do you think the Prime Minister should be held to a lower standard than an army officer who's being required to go and die in service of Queen and country because the Prime Minister says that this is what we're going to be doing as an act of foreign policy? Can you explain to me why he should be held to a lesser standard than a 22-year-old
Yes, I can. Well, up to a point, Lord Copper. I can say that. I can say that.
That's going to be a very curate-egg answer.
Yes. Up to. I can say that having an extramarital affair doesn't necessarily affect my ability to do my job as Prime Minister and doesn't necessarily involve any security threats. And with somebody in your line of the work, we can't afford to take any risks at all because you are...
we can afford to take a risk with the Prime Minister.
Well, up to a point, we can afford to think that this particular affair about which... No, that this affair about which we know clearly isn't a security threat, whereas any intelligence officer who has any sort of affair becomes a potential security threat because... And now it's all going to fall apart because I have to say the words out loud because he is probably going to have an affair at some point in the future with somebody who is less insulated from the possibility of being a security threat.
Yes, I also return to my point that all affairs have an element of deception involved.
Of course they do.
And where you have deception and where you have attempt to hide something, where you have the ability to be duplicitous, those are things which are not acceptable in the intelligence and security world, nor are they acceptable in the police world or any other organisation which requires trustworthiness and confidence and also confidentiality. And therefore, my greatest concern is that the Prime Minister is not being held to the correct standard of probity. And it is brutally as simple as that. And if he is not, and he is being asked, or he is seeing information and intelligence which is going to affect this country, it is not outside the realms of possibility, given previous reports into the glorious President Trump, that people might be trying to influence him, saying, well...
I think the party, that when he turned up at the airport without his security detail, looking like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, and of course, Paul Caruana Galizia over at Tortoise has done a lot of reports into those parties and some of the stuff that went on. That is it's a very, very real and live fear. And the night after the election, he attended the birthday party of a former KGB agent whose son is now in the House of Lords. I mean, the problem is, and you must be more frustrated than I am, because I at least have the outlet and the valve, the pressure valve of my radio show. But the stuff you're concerned about, given your background, is almost drowned out by all the other stuff that other people are concerned about, all of which gets filed under not enough people are concerned about any of it.
Yes, well, I spent the last 3 years seething, basically.
Yeah, I bet you have. Because you're looking at it and thinking, how is that being allowed to happen from the perspective of military intelligence and national security?
Absolutely. On a brutal note, my wife died of lung cancer during lockdown while Bojo was partying. Yeah. And we could only have 10 people to go to my wife's funeral on the day they had one of their Downing Street parties. And so I just sat and looked at the wall and thought, this is now beyond parody. This has made my blood boil. Yeah. I'm afraid it is. I mean, I try not to be Colonel angry, but sometimes I just think, what has this country turned into?
Well, that's the question I ask far too often on this programme, and I only keep asking it because people like you keep providing me with such powerful answers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know the F word, and don't worry, relax, sure. All people with fingers over buttons. The F word is underused, but I'm afraid if you sat back and did a rational analysis, which regrettably I've done, which has been based on listening to you seething for 3 years, I've come to the inevitable conclusion. That the fact that they are trying to assault human rights, they're trying to assault freedom of expression, they're trying to stop people. Well, they have stopped people protesting. Yeah. If I went outside in the street and bellowed, Boris Johnson is, and insert expletive here, technically speaking, a policeman would come and take me off the street and say, actually, you've caused offence to Mrs. Scroggins, number 42. Yeah. Caused a disturbance, and so we're going to put you away, or we're going to see you raised in court. I think this is utterly ludicrous. I spent 26 years fighting for this blasted country to make sure we did have freedom of expression. And what the government doing? You can't do that anymore. That's completely bonkers. I mean, what is the matter with these people? Why can't they open their eyes? I'll tell you why. Sorry, it's a bit of a rant.
No, you carry on.
It's because you've got the client right-wing press who are sitting there waiting for their peerages. They're desperate to keep their jobs. They're desperate that nobody else that gets into power that might actually think, that'd be a good idea. Let's some press scrutiny. Let's have some independent fact-checking. So when we turn around and say X is the case, somebody turns around and says, you know what, it's not the case. And this goes back to one of my absolute frustrations, is that when people do interviews on the TV or on the radio, and a minister sits there and spouts lies, which is what they are, why does the interviewer simply not turn and say, you're lying? A bit like Mick Lynchett. And I, for the life of me, despair of a country whereby people who are trying to hold politicians' toes to the fire and trying to hold them to account simply don't do their blasted job. Their job is to make sure they tell the truth. Actually, I digress. The one thing I wrote on my pad yesterday when I was shouting at the computer was Pac-Man. Now, I thought, how would this crop of incompetent, lying, deceitful, duplicitous, ne'er-do-well, Sharrow-bank-riding cretins, how do you think Jeremy Paxman would have felt about sticking in front of them and saying, well, Prime Minister, you've told me that this is the case. It's simply not the case, is it? And when Bojo goes, you say, no, that's not the case. You're lying again.
Do you want to do my holiday cover?
I'd be delighted.
I'm going to answer the last question. You won't like it. The answer.
I like very little things at the moment.
I don't want to tip you over the edge, but the first bit is I can answer all of it in one go. Paxman wouldn't get close to them these days. They wouldn't go anywhere near that programme. And I read some words today that actually chilled me slightly. And those words were speaking to GB News last night or something like that, talking about Boris Johnson's latest interventions. And you think it's bad enough in what we might call established or mainstream media, what an easy ride they get. But it's still not easy enough because now you've got Rupert Murdoch and other billionaires, pro-Brexit billionaires, setting up their own television stations and losing money hand over fist and employing pretty much everybody from the sort of unemployment line outside Broadcasting Central, because they need to create an environment now where Boris Johnson doesn't even get the pushback that he might get from some of the people that you had in mind when you just made your incredibly salient points about the state of client journalism.
Hasn't this country come to a completely bonkers, ludicrous pass?
Yes.
When you've got GB News that's been set up because we've taken RT off the air.
Well, I shall leave that chuckle hanging in the ether, Anthony, and I shall look forward to talking to you again. And as I should say, on many, many occasions, there is great comfort to be found in company, and that cuts both ways. If you find comfort in my company, I can assure you that I find company in yours, listening to this, and sometimes, but by no means always, calling in to contribute. Oh boy, it's 11:33. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. It is 25 minutes to 12. I hope this is an accurate Carl Sagan quote. He's a pretty reliable arbiter, and it certainly seems likely. One of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. And as that dropped on my Twitter, this came in by text: you so obsessed being a Ramona, you still think you can change people's minds. How sad are you? I'll just leave those two hanging in glorious opposition to each other. Steve's in Benfleet. Steve, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I called in to try and help answer your question about why people still vote Boris Johnson, why still follow him. Yeah. It's a little bit like that